We definitely need some exciting, energetic music. That introduction to the show, Nick, is just too low key for me.
Especially if you're out of control.
Yeah, it's too much in control. Actually, that I
That's right.
find.
This is
So
this is
I like
not
the
it.
I like the electrical sort of ambiance and
Energy.
even the
Yeah,
background sounding, but I don't know. I miss the music. We have to do something about some music for the show.
I think you know what? My favorite piece of music for a talk show I can't use because it's owned by Disney, and it's the theme to the Pirates of the Caribbean. I love that piece. I would
I've
use it
never
in a heartbeat.
I've never
Dun
seen the
dun dun
movie, so
dun
I
dun
don't even I'm not even sure that I know the music.
dun 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 dun. Yeah, you know it. You
No,
just
I
don't
well,
recognize
maybe I do, but I don't recognize it.
it.
And it's
Do
not
yourself a
because
favor.
you're tone deaf,
Do
because you
yourself a
aren't.
favor.
You're not tone deaf, right, Nick?
I'm sorry. What was that? No, I'm not tone deaf.
No.
There are those who will think I am if I spend too much time singing into a microphone, but that's why I don't try to make my living that way. But do yourself a favor and watch The Curse of the Black Pearl, the very first one, and it's I think one of the best. It's a more than a trilogy. There's like three or four of them, but and each one is really well done. But I'm ready for another big swashbuckling adventure like that, or a new Star Trek film, or something like that. But there's nothing out there when it comes to.
No,
And I know we
it's
weren't planning to talk about this, but there's a huge gap right now in high quality movies. Maybe it's not the writer's strike in Hollywood. This goes well beyond that. It's one of these deals where they're just rehashing old stories. The
right.
best movie I've seen recently is Dungeons and Dragons, um, Honor Among Thieves. It's a fantasy. It's based on a game I used to play in high school, but it's fun. It's just it doesn't take itself seriously. It does, but you know what I mean? It's like Kelly's Heroes is a parody of Warflix, but they don't paint it as a parody. Figure that out when you get into the movie.
Right.
But there's something about movies like The Curse of the Black Pearl or one of the Star Trek movie with the young cast when Kirk was young and took over the Enterprise. How he got all that done. There's an energy to that that's just not in the latest movies, and I miss that. I like big budget movies. Haven't really had a fantastic one since Lord of the Rings, which was 2001. Tells you how long that's been. So, anyway, that set aside, we have more adventure here in Canada to talk about. That's real life.
Or an
Did you?
adventure around the world that has a tie to Canada. Well, by the way, I don't know whether you noticed or not, but HMCS Ottawa did traverse the Taiwan Strait the other
Yeah,
day.
I've been watching that story. Flanked by
Right.
three not Russian,
Chinese.
Chinese warships, Taiwanese warships on the other side, and an American warship out front. She's part of a flotilla. They're passing through the Taiwanese Strait, which
Right.
everybody else considers international waters except for the Chinese.
Right.
To take a
Well, this is
line, to take a line from Hunt from Red October, this is how wars start, Ambassador, which is another
well,
movie I just watched again.
but I support the move.
I do too.
I think that if you are insisting that it's international waterways, then you better use it.
Yep.
And this is exactly the right thing to do. It obviously it presents a target to the Chinese, but I just don't. I have a lot of trouble believing that the Chinese government is that reckless that they're prepared to start a shooting war over certainly over the Straits of Taiwan and perhaps even Taiwan itself. I could be dead wrong about that, but I just that's just my sense. But I just mention it because it's something that's happening on the international scene. It's not
Right.
here in Canada, and it does involve Canadian servicemen and
Absolutely.
servicewomen,
Yep.
and of course it involves the Royal Canadian Navy, which has very close to my heart and yours as well.
That's right. And listen, this is what a Navy's for. This is
Right.
how you protect your sea lanes. This is what you project your foreign policy with. The Army you can send somewhere, the Air Force can fly over a place, but nothing projects power like a naval warship off the coast. Nothing.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's what, whether it's a battleship aircraft carrier or a Canadian frigate, it doesn't matter. The fact
Right.
it's there, that's a little piece of Canada. That's sovereign Canadian territory. And by sending it there, this is, I'm not going to criticize the government in this particular instance for the way they're handling that, because I think you're absolutely right. If you're going to have a Navy, then be prepared to use it to project your foreign policy.
Right.
Doesn't mean we want to start a war, but we have to be ready to fight one if the other guy pulls the trigger. And that's
Right.
traditionally been Canada's position anyway. World War I, World War II, Korea, we don't start fights, we finish them. So
Good
that's my
point.
attitude. Yeah, that's what you're in. That's what you sign up for. We don't ever want to see this happen. I'm not hoping that somebody shoots at a Canadian destroyer or frigate, but we have to be prepared to defend ourselves if they do. And that's why what's going on within the Navy itself is so heartbreaking. I won't go down that rabbit hole. We've been down it before.
Right.
But we better be prepared to give these guys everything they need to make sure that they can be successful.
So let's circle back to what's happening here in Canada, Nick. And
Yeah,
of course, one of the big stories that is emerging is the now very consistent difference between the conservatives and the liberals in polling. It's this
yeah,
isn't just I know I characterized it as a surge in the polls when we were discussing it during our pre-production meeting. But the reality is, this is more than just a surge. Now, the conservatives have been trending up now consistently for a couple of months, and I'm hearing. I don't think that people in the Liberal Party are panicking yet, but there's got to be when you see this kind of thing happening. There has to be questions that are being asked, and here's the thing about Justin Trudeau is that give credit to the Liberals members of Parliament where it's due. They're disciplined. They support the leader. They have some loyalty to the party, and so unlike what the Conservatives have been accused of from time to time of having a habit of eating their leaders with the minute they stumble the first time. There's a certain amount of respect for the leadership generically that liberals seem to have more of than conservatives have. That said, I am hearing from people I know that are in the Liberal Party, and by that I mean in the caucus, that there are some rumblings, and it's pretty hard to not tie the problems that they're having in the polls right now, their downward trend in the polls, to the Prime Minister himself, to Justin Trudeau himself, and his agenda, and the people that he has picked for his cabinet. And when I say the agenda, I don't just mean. I mean, I think this is really important. I think that Justin Trudeau, I think he's a bit of a. I think he's a lot of a lightweight. I think he has a habit of stumbling along. I know you used to call him quite a bit of used sock salesman,
yep.
and while that may not be true literally, it certainly does give, I think, the right impression of him. He's been a bit of a political buffoon. But nothing has really stuck to him. But I think the Canadians now they're tired of him. They're tired of this constant now extremist woke agenda. Even people who are left leaning are starting to say, gosh, really enough, guys. I mean, we have problems with inflation. We have problems with lack of housing. We have problems, all kinds of problems. But here we are implementing a new carbon tax. We're talking about all kinds of things that have nothing to do with the day-to-day lives of Canadians. And if you're not, it's very nice to think big. And I'm not defending the government here, but when you're in government and you win elections, you have a mandate to do certain things. And even though I don't agree with it, I understand that they have a mandate to implement some of these, what I consider to be somewhat extremist policies. But you don't do this and ignore the day-to-day stuff. And this is what they're doing, is they have this sort of head in the clouds attitude towards Canadians. They have this thing like it's our mission to save the planet, and if you happen to go bankrupt or you starve, or you lose your home along in the process, well, that's too bad. At least we will have done something to save the planet, which of course you and I know isn't. That's just not really happening with their agenda, with their policies.
Right, of course. And I think that they act, I would say, to describe the Liberal Party as anything but terrified, even if they are showing unity in public. When you see senior ministers like Guilbeault standing outside for a press conference with about 4 cameramen and 2 reporters outside the Chateau Quebec, or whatever the name of the hotel is there in Quebec City, that the Conservatives are using for the thing, they can't draw flies. And Guilbeault was talking about how unfit the current leadership of the Conservative Party is. To me, that's a mark of desperation. If no one's listening to you, who are you talking to? I mean, if the only people who show up are CBC reporters, when the Prime Minister won't even answer a question from Rebel News, I watched that question front to back and listened to what the question was. I thought it was a legitimate question. And he said, "I've given my opinion about your organization. I'm not going to speak to you any further on the topic." Never mind what the question is. That attitude alone is insulting, because whether you like Rebel News or not, they are still an outlet that a lot of Canadians get their news from. Right. And it's the same thing with a whole bunch of podcasters. You and I, we wouldn't get anywhere either with this guy because we don't speak the narrative. So when you watch all of this and you put it together in a pot, stir it up, you get a real witch's brew, which is designed, which is concocted by their own hands to issue them out the door. They're making their own poison. They're not listening to what's going on. They're not paying attention to rising interest rates or how devastating, what is the word I'm looking for, inflation is. They don't understand that 6% inflation, 9% in food, eats away at people's budgets like cancer, and you just can't keep that up. So when the Bank of Canada comes out and says, well, we're going to hold the line for now, but we're not beyond raising it if we absolutely have to, what are people supposed to think? What are they supposed to do? We only have so much money. And when you tap that out and people start living on their credit cards, and when those get tapped out and people start losing their homes, we have people, carpenters, plumbers, truck drivers, living in vehicles who could make $35, $40 an hour and can't afford a home. That's a problem. And he won't address it. He will not address it. And that's why I think Pierre is doing so well in the polls.
Well, and I agree with all of that, but here's the fly in the ointment for the Liberals. The real source, in my view, of the inflation that we're seeing are the policies that they themselves are adopting. And the only really effective way of addressing the inflation problem is to reverse the policies. And so you're really talking about somebody who just is not, they're going to stubbornly hold on to this, and there's really no surprise there. Look, when you talk about, and I know we've talked about this before, Nick, but it's worth repeating. You have a housing shortage, and you're increasing immigration towards 1 million people a year, and that doesn't include temporary workers, it doesn't include refugees, and it doesn't include students, foreign students. So how do you square that circle? Well, the answer is you don't. You can't. But they're it's like they're oblivious to the consequences of the policies that they're implementing. And hey, I don't care if we have a million new people coming into Canada every year. Listen, if there's a way to do it, I don't really care if you have 5 million. Now, I have no, as long as people are coming to this country and they're willing to take on a commitment to Canada and to being Canadian. That's my sole criteria. So I don't care about numbers, but whatever the number is, whether it's 500 or 500,000 or 5 million, you have to have a coordinated policy to ensure that the infrastructure that you're developing year in and year out can keep pace with the growth in the population that is a result of essentially your policies. So it's like they're living in some sort of a fantasy land, and they've convinced themselves. And this is the really disturbing thing: is they've convinced themselves that anybody like you or I that raises the question about, let's say, immigration and the impact that it has on the housing market and on housing prices, that we have to be racist, like knuckle dragging Neanderthals. And they completely dismiss anything we have to say, and they do it in the most insulting terms.
Yeah.
And people are tired of that, and they're starting to see through it. I think, and I think that's good news for Canada in the long run.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think like I said, when they're making their own poison, this is, I mean that figuratively, of course,
Of course,
but when you look at the surge, this is a little more than just a little bump in the polls. You're in some
exactly.
polls,
Yes,
the Conservatives are ahead by 12 to 14 points, which puts them
consistently,
well. Yes, this is not just
consistently
one
across many
outlier.
different polls.
This is not just one outlier. This is
Right.
a lot of polls are now saying that. And if that holds true, and there's that caveat, if that holds true, that would give the Conservatives a huge majority. Is it the biggest majority in our history? No, but we
Well,
don't need them. We
I
just
don't
need
know if
to.
I would go. I don't know if I would go quite that far yet,
That's what I'm
but
saying. The same thing.
they're
We
but
don't need.
they are inching towards majority territory if the polling
I
holds.
think they're
Yes.
already there. 14 points. I think they're already there.
Well, it's not
But
just the
anyway, the
spread.
point is, as long as they don't.
Remember that there were other political parties as well. So you have to remember it's not just the spread. It's where you are once you're in the 39 to 40% range consistently. Now you're really starting to move into what I would say is majority territory.
If you
They're
look at the
not
other
quite there
parties,
yet. They're toying with it.
if you look at the other parties, every tick up for the NDP hurts the Liberals. Every tick up for the Green Party
Right,
hurts the
right.
Liberals. So if you combine those rises, because they've gone up about a point each in the polls, every tick up by the Max Bernier crowd hurts the Conservatives. But he's only gone up 1 point from 3 to 4%. And polls don't mean a lot. I'm not worried about that. But the point is, the Liberals are losing support far faster than anything that Max Bernier could do to the Conservatives.
Right.
So that's why I say I don't. I see them already, in my mind at least, in
Well,
majority territory.
yeah,
Now,
well, it
I'm
could be.
trying. I'm just trying to set my bias aside because I want a conservative majority. There's no mistake of that. But to try to be objective, just looking at cold hard facts and numbers, unless the Conservatives really blow their feet off in the next, let's say, year to 18 months, I don't think we're going to go 2 more years before we go back to the polls, but I don't think it's going to happen this fall either.
Well, that all depends on how on the wild card here is the NDP.
Yes.
If Jagmeet Singh feels that by dropping his party support for the Liberals, and allowing us to go to the polls, it's not quite as easy as it used to be. You don't just you don't just vote them out of office anymore. There are some procedural things that make that a little bit more of a challenge. But the real, as I say, the wild card is this: it's the NDP. If the NDP feels that by going to the polls they will make electoral gains, then they have an incentive to bring the government down. If, on the other hand, they feel that they're only going to tread water and maybe even lose some seats, then we could see this minority government going the full 5 years. So it's right now it's really anybody's guess. But the guy that's going to make that decision is Jagmeet Singh. It's not Trudeau, and it's not Pierre Poilievre. I will tell you this though, Nick. I'm not convinced, given the situation right now, given the fact that the Liberals are polling so dismally, fairly early still in their mandate.
Yeah.
There's plenty of time between now and the next elect when we have to go to the polls constitutionally. Uh, I'm not convinced that the Liberals don't, take some senior state Liberal politicians, take Justin out for dinner one night and say to him, "Listen, it's been a great run. You've won 3 elections. You've been prime minister now. Uh,
Nine
by
years.
the time he steps down, if he was convinced to step down, he'd have been prime minister for as long as Stephen Harper. That's a pretty good record, notwithstanding whatever our concerns are about their policies. But from a political point of view, it's a good record. He could be basically shown the door very politely. So I'm not 100% convinced that Justin Trudeau. I'm 100% convinced that he wants to lead the party into the next election, but that may not be in the cards. And if the polls continue to tank for the Liberals so early on in their mandate, and it doesn't look that they're going to recover, then you'll start to see some agitation in the Liberal Party. Some people starting to say, well, Mr. Trudeau, maybe it's time to move on. Every politician has a shelf life, Nick. And I suspect strongly that Justin Trudeau has reached the shelf life for his leadership of the Liberal Party.
The thing I worry about is there used to be, remember the show 22 Minutes? They had a skit when Jean Chrétien was in office, and they literally had to drag him physically out of office in the skit.
Right.
I'm afraid that is our young friend Justin Trudeau's biggest weakness. He simply will not be. He loves the trappings of power. He loves to be able to be the center of attention. It never occurs to him that he's the source of the problem.
And I completely understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. But the Jean Chrétien example is actually an example of a political party where some of the people, Paul Martin in particular, basically organized a coup. And it's funny because and there were a lot of people that were unhappy with Chrétien's leadership. I knew a number of prominent Liberal members of Parliament who were upset because they thought that Chrétien was way too left wing. Of course, he's a hardcore conservative compared to Justin Trudeau. But Paul Martin managed to secure the support of what I would call the liberal, not the liberal, but the more or less conservative rump that still existed at that time within the Liberal Party, within the Liberal caucus, and there was a lot. And he organized support in the different ridings and that, and he really managed to push Chrétien out. Of course, he turned out to be completely the opposite of what everybody who was supporting him within the Liberal Party wanted, which is why he didn't last very long in the end, because there were a lot of people who supported him who were there were some senior, very good members of Parliament, Liberal members of Parliament. And I know people are going to be going, they're pulling their hair out thinking there's that Benham, he's defending the Liberals again. But we're talking 20 years ago, okay?
Yeah.
20 some years ago. And they felt that he had betrayed them. And I think I don't think that that's an unreasonable way to characterize it. So they ended up pushing him out. So one never knows. And I guess the way I would sum up this whole discussion is there's a reason why politicians have described in our system of government the prime minister as being, having climbed to the top of the greasy pole, because you never know when you're going to actually grab onto a part of that pole it's filled with grease and end up sliding all the way down again.
Yeah.
It really is very Darwinian, survival of the fittest, so to speak.
Amen to
And
that.
I'm just not sure that Justin Trudeau has it in him.
Well, I certainly hope that you're right, but I think he surrounded himself with ideologues who think exactly like he does.
I
Chrystia
agree. I think he
Freeland,
has too.
you went down the list, the climate minister and all this stuff, they all think exactly like he does. They have the same mission focus as he does. They won't listen the way he won't. And when you've got a cadre of people around you telling you what you want to hear, because not just because they don't want to get hung by a piano wire, but because they believe exactly like you do and are blind to the reality. Like when somebody says inflation's unfortunate, but oh well, too bad, suck it up, buttercup. I'm paraphrasing a lot. They're out of touch with most Canadians.
Right.
Those people don't have to worry about inflation. They've got indexed pensions. They're making great money. So if it costs 5, 6, 7% to borrow money, it doesn't bother them. But the truck driver who's 74 years old, still slamming his spine up and down in the cab of his seat and can't afford a rent increase. Okay, and I'm stealing from just Pierre Poilievre's story here from this little bit of a speech he gave that I watched. He can't afford that. He cannot afford it. And that's the part that's going to, ultimately, that's the poison that's going to sink or kill the Liberal Party as we know it today, which I don't necessarily, I'm not, again, it's not physical, but if the political party that party was reduced to the minivan party for about 10 or 15 years, I would be ecstatic.
Well, maybe. All I will say, though, is this. We're talking about Justin Trudeau as an individual and as the prime minister, and he's the leader of the government and he's the leader of the party. You're quite right, of course, in pointing out that he has a cadre of supporters around him that are going to defend him and defend what he stands for, not because they're necessarily loyal to him, but because they believe in the same things. But if Justin Trudeau goes, the crew goes. So what replaces them, if and when the time comes, is anybody's best guess. But as I like to tell people, the Liberal Party of 2023 is not the Liberal Party of 1980. There were lots of things that I disagreed with Pierre Trudeau, with Justin's father, but you had to give the guy some respect, and he was nowhere near as kooky on policy as his son has turned out to be. But what can you say? Okay, Justin is a product of his time, and there's a lot of it going around. If you're worried about a pandemic, and I know we want to talk about this after the break, but the real pandemic that's gripping us in our part of the world is the pandemic of idiocy.
Amen to that. Where does that? Okay,
let's not mince words.
Yeah, we don't pull punches. But the biggest problem that the Liberals have as a party are the same problems that the Democrats have in the United States as a party. If you cut the head of the snake off, right, to use an old analogy, who comes behind? Look down the benches of the Liberal Party of Canada. Who is there? You've got no one. There's no one to step in a leadership role. Even Ken Dryden's gone. I mean, one of the few almost got a brain liberals. He was a great hockey player, but not so much a politician. Anyway, set
Well,
that aside.
Ken 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 suffered from having taken maybe a couple of too many pucks in the head.
There you go. That's right. That's in the
Anyway,
days before they
but
had real goalmen.
a decent guy in all fairness.
Yeah, I'm not. That's why I'm trying not to be too disparaging towards
Right,
him.
right, right.
Well, other than that, who's over there?
It's well, look, it's a great observation, Nick. A great observation, but I would say that observation applies everywhere. When you look at, for instance, you know, we really do need to go for a break. But before we do, let me just say, I mean, I watched take the American politics, for instance. You're mentioning the Democratic Party. I'm saying, okay, but the same thing exists in the Republican Party. I mean, I watched the debate a couple of weeks ago, and it was appallingly. I can't find the words to adequately describe how shocking it was for me that they had so little, I don't know, vision, so little grasp of issues. There was a lot of cliches. There were a lot of yelling at one another, throwing barbs and everything. Everybody trying to get their soundbite in, and all of that, is important, I guess. But still, in all, so I'm not knocking Donald Trump here. This is not an anti-Trump rant. I'm just saying that the problem that we have with leadership, or the lack of leadership, is endemic. It cuts right across the political spectrum. It cuts right across both countries, and I think it's a Western civilization thing. For some reason, we have not succeeded in raising real leaders, and I'm going to leave it at that because we really do have to go for a break, Nick.
All right, I'll
So,
hold my tongue.
okay, so hold on. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on Out of Control with Nick and Joe. Stay tuned. There's a lot more fun left. And we're back.
We are.
I'm
Just
Joe. He's
one
Nick.
final word.
I'm in
Sorry?
Ottawa.
Yes, you are, and I'm not.
He's all the way in an undisclosed location. on Canada's
somewhere in
left coast.
somewhere in Souk, BC. Yeah.
Somewhere in
Man,
CBC. Nick, did you see? I don't know if you caught my show on Thursday, but I happened to come across a very interesting news story out of British Columbia, just as a little bit of an aside, because how everybody's been talking about the the heat wave that we experienced for 3 days. Um, uh,
yeah, some heat wave.
yeah. Okay, whatever you want. And I was telling somebody the other day, I said, we used to call that Indian summer, but, but I guess you can't do that anymore. So I think you have to call it First Nations Indigenous summer or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. but
Speaking,
but hard on the tail of all of the news about the heat wave. And of course, the United Nations talking about, they made an announcement that the climate is broken. The earth is sizzling. We've left the age, as the Secretary General of the United Nations has pointed out, we have exited the age of global warming and we're now in the age of global boiling. Okay.
oh, brother.
Okay. But while all of this is going on, what the mainstream media failed to report was that Lake Louise, British Columbia, experienced its first
You saw that,
snowstorm of the year this past
right?
week.
We're not even. We're barely out of August. They got a snowstorm already,
Now,
and on top of
I'm not saying this proves or disproves anything, but it's just an indication how corrupt the mainstream media is. I never thought I'd say this, but it's corruption is the only word I can use, Nick. Because 2 weeks ago, 1,600 scientists signed a declaration that they make public that there is no climate emergency, and there isn't a single mainstream media source that's reported that. And this snowfall in Lake Louise, as I said, I'm not saying that it proves or disproves anything. I'm just saying that it gives a certain context to all of the doom and gloom stories that have been circulating out there this past week or so. So
if I was a young person today, what I'd be a lot more worried about is sharks attacking my inflatable catamaran off the coast of Australia. Like, first of all, why would you go out in the ocean on an inflatable catamaran? And then, think about it, inflatable, that means it's balloons stuck together. And sharks come along with rows of razor sharp teeth and take a liking to it, and you're surprised. And you have to call the Australian Coast Guard to come and save you because you're 500 miles off the coast. What are you doing there in the first place? Okay, that kind of logic would frighten me, because as somebody who has a boat that is theoretically capable of making that trip with a lot of, you could, in theory. Very theoretically. It's not making that trip, but I'm just saying that if somebody's brave enough, I'd rather take my boat than an inflatable cat. Just not going to happen. Or be a sailboat off the coast of Spain where the orcas are attacking them and sinking them. And like that, you want an environmental emergency? If you're at sea and that happens, you have an environmental emergency. There's water where there shouldn't be and sharks where there shouldn't be. Anyway, speaking of the environment here in Nanaimo, in BC, there's a town just up the coast on the right-hand side. Many people know about it. It's called Nanaimo. It's home of the world-famous chocolate market. Anyway, the Nanaimo City Council has in its ultimate wisdom decided that they're going to include in their building code a ban on any form of fossil fuel powered, that means natural gas and propane, form of heating, cooking, or drying of clothing. So no dryers, no dishwashers, no ovens, stoves, no furnaces can be powered by these very clean energy sources. They have to go electric.
Right.
Well, look, you can do that in BC because 70% of the power in BC comes from hydroelectric dams. But what does that have? When other communities look at this and say, "Whoa, man, we got to save the planet. Let's make everybody do that." That really bothers me. First of all, it's none of the municipality's business how I choose to heat my home, whether it's gas, wood stove, heating oil. I'm paying the bill. So you butt out. I mean, this goes right back to my old property rights days. You have no business telling a private property owner what he can do on his own land. That includes what kind of house you can build, how it's heated, how you heat the water, how you wash the dishes or wash the clothes, what you cook your food on. What's next?
Well,
Banning outdoor barbecues? I mean, come on.
well, first thing is, let me be clear right from the start. Unlike you, Nick, I do think that the government has some role to play in not in regulating, but in ensuring that whatever the fuel source is that's being used is compatible with whatever infrastructure distribution network exists, because it's the city, it's the
That's
municipality that's providing
that's a different
that
kettle of fish.
infrastructure. Right. Which leads me into my chief criticism of this decision, and that is that the decisions that have been made over time up until this point, okay, have heretofore been predicated on the belief that we're going to use a multiplicity of fuel sources. And, you know, I'm old enough that I remember the big campaign of the federal government to encourage people to get off of fuel oil and to use natural gas. And a whole lot
Right.
of people did that. They took advantage of incentives, financial incentives that the federal government were offering at the time. So the planning that's gone on with respect to expansion of hydro production and distribution has all taken into account the fact that we also are using natural gas. So if all of a sudden you stop using natural gas and you ban its use outright, you have to replace it, but you're replacing it with hydro that has nobody's actually thought through whether or not we actually have the capacity to be able to supply that much electricity to all of those new homes, because it was never planned that way. And this is not just Nanaimo. Nanaimo is just one of many municipalities that are either implementing this kind of ban or are talking about it. Here in Ottawa, it's part of the climate change master plan. Part of it is to ban the use of natural gas appliances in new construction. They haven't actually adopted that formally yet as a bylaw, but they haven't renounced it either. They're sort of sitting on the fence right now because there's been so much opposition, largely due to the effort of our friend Tom Harris, the International
Yep.
Climate Science Coalition, who happens to be here in Ottawa, centered here in Ottawa, and he's done a lot of real hard work informing people and presenting evidence one way or the other. So, look, I don't have a problem with electricity. I don't have a problem with electric heating in principle. I don't have a problem with an electric car in principle. I have the two problems I have. First is I wouldn't buy an electric car today because they're just not reliable. And in many cases, they're not safe. And that's for starters. And the second thing is, I would, the very fact that the government would tell me that I have to buy an electric car is reason enough for me to say,
Yes.
or maybe not actually say it, just signal it. You're not
That's
going to
right.
tell me what kind of car I have to buy. If in fact this is a problem, then the free market will sort it out over a period of time, as it has done all along,
Right.
So,
I look on that on those points. I totally agree with you. When I was talking about private property rights, you're right about how they have to plan for
right,
multiple energy sources, and they haven't done that. That's true. I get that, and I agree with you on that. But I'm talking about a guy who goes out and buys a plot of land for 10 or 15 or 20 million dollars and puts that investment in. It's not much speculation to do that today because of the housing crisis, but traditionally buying land and building houses on it and hope people will buy that is called building on speculation, and is a
Right.
very risky thing to do.
Right.
So they're taking the risk, and you're going to tell them how to heat and plumb these houses? No, 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 no. You get the building permits passed, you put in the sewer and the water, and let him figure out how he's going to heat and cool and run those homes. And
Sure.
then the consumer can make the choice.
Yeah, and again, as a matter of principle, that's sort of where I fall out as well. I'm just saying that I don't have, there are a lot of people more on the conservative side of the political spectrum, ideologically speaking, if I could use that term, as it applies to conservatives, that are um, they're just institutionally opposed. In principle, they're opposed to electric vehicles, for instance, okay? And I'm not in favor of them or opposed to them, okay, any more than I'm in favor or opposed to the rotary engine, okay? I I don't care. What works, and is it reliable? Is it going to get me from point A to point B? Well, it's not going to get me. Electric cars are not going to get me from point A to point B at this point in time. Not here in Canada, to the degree that I would use an electric car, because I would go from, I just drove down to New Jersey, 800 miles, right? Another 800 miles back. Where am I going to plug in to charge my electric car? Uh, the service stations don't exist. The distribution network doesn't exist. People forget that the car uh, wasn't invented by the government, and the whole fueling network, oil companies, gas stations, etc. All of this was the public needing something, and the private sector filling that demand. And getting the government to try to plan this stuff out is it's just a recipe for disaster. It's
Well,
no disrespect to government. I'm just saying, government doesn't have skin in the game.
one
And
of the reasons why I am so opposed to EVs, to shorten the phrase, number one, just as an example, when we were coming back from our recent trip to the valley, we had taken, you want to talk about an experience, drive a Honda Fit from Sioux Lookout all the way to Souk. That's an experience. So
right,
we're approaching the ferry terminal here in Vancouver at a place, it wasn't Tsawwassen, I forget, it doesn't matter which one it was. There's several. Um, Harold's Bay or something like that. It's about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Traffic's beginning to build because Vancouver's a metropolis. It's a big city. And we were crawling ahead, crawling ahead, crawling ahead. And when we got to the scene of the obstruction, it was an electric car with a flat battery.
right,
Now, this is the nuts and bolts of living with an electric car. They thought they had enough juice in the battery, couldn't get as far as they wanted to, and had to wait for a tow truck because you can't carry 5 gallons of electricity in your trunk, pour it in the
exactly,
car to get you off. That's one
exactly,
of the biggest problems I have with EVs.
right,
Never mind the environmental side of it and how much stuff goes into those batteries that we could better use someplace else. That's another kettle of fish. Never mind the incentives that, 7, 8, 10, 14,000, I forget what the number is now, but thousands of dollars of taxpayer subsidies in order to get people to buy these things, because without it they won't sell.
right.
And no, I'm
Because
sorry, until you fix those problems, then to me they're a waste of time and money.
it's the number one problem with electric vehicles is the battery. We just don't have the technology
Yeah.
available to us at this point in time to be able to store sufficient amount of electricity, of power, to get from point A to point B. And people forget, okay, when you talk about Elon Musk and you talk about his whole operation and wherever it is in the southern United States somewhere, I don't know what state exactly, but it's a big difference between that and Canada. One of the things that when you drive your car in the wintertime in Canada, okay, you better have heat. And the source of heat is, as you well know, Nick, but maybe some of our listeners who are not well versed in this don't know that when you heat your vehicle in the summertime, in the wintertime, you're not doing this off of some electric coil somewhere. You're basically taking heat off the engine block.
That's right.
Okay, it's secondary. You're recycling the heat, as it were. Okay, so not so with an electric vehicle. With an electric vehicle, not only do you have to have, not only does your battery have to supply enough power to get from point A to point B, but it's got to supply enough power to heat the vehicle, including when it runs out of battery power. Of course, you're going to have that problem if you run out of gas. But as you I think very eloquently pointed out, you're not going to get a 5 gallon pail or 5 gallon um, uh, carton of electricity. So it's a real serious problem, and there are other safety issues as well. There's a lot of spontaneous combustion that's happening with these batteries and that, and there are jurisdictions that are banning EV vehicles from parking indoors now.
Well, I just happen to have on my Facebook page pulled up here what's in a battery. These are the resources that I was talking about. A typical EV battery weighs 1,000 pounds. It contains 25 pounds of lithium, 60 pounds of nickel, 44 pounds of manganese, 30 pounds of cobalt, 200 pounds of copper, 400 pounds of aluminum, steel, and plastic. Inside are over 6,000 individual lithium-ion cells. Okay, look, a lot of these are rare earth metals that are critical to our ongoing expansion of our high tech. Your cell phone, your laptop, your computer, all these things require a lot of what we have, and we're wasting them because what happens, let's say the battery lasts 5 years. You know, a typical car battery lasts 5 to 7 years, depending on how hard you work it, the climate it's in, blah, blah, blah. So let's give it 5 years. What do you do with 1,000 pounds worth of worn out battery that's full of this stuff?
Listen, don't even get me started on this, Nick. The whole environmental movement, the solar panels, the batteries for EVs, the wind turbines, they all sound really very interesting. And there's an environmental problem in producing all of these things to start with. But the real problem that hasn't hit us yet, that's coming at us like a speeding freight train, and not an electric speeding freight train, mind you, is the disposal. That is an ecological disaster that is waiting to happen, that will be 100% the blame will be on the shoulders of the environmentalists who pushed forward these short-sighted policies for the best of intentions, mostly, maybe, but still, you know, you have to think about the long term. And these guys are so fixated on this nonsense about a climate emergency that they don't see the disaster that they're sowing the seeds of by following the policies that they're pushing the policies like this on us. It's a real problem.
If you remember,
and it's a problem. You know, I'm not a young man anymore, Nick, and I'll let you speak for yourself. But I think I'm still going to be around when this problem hits. I know my children and grandchildren are going to be around for it.
It's already hitting. 20 years ago, okay, I was still in radio and terrestrial radio, and they started putting up wind turbines. And I remember ringing the alarm bell about these things. Never mind the resources they consumed for installation, the 66 cubic yards of concrete that went in the base, blah, blah, blah. You know, all that stuff, the copper and everything. What happens when these things reach the end of their life expectancy, which we are now seeing? Who's going to pay to take them down and dispose of them? And nobody wanted to listen to me because I said it's going to be whoever land it sits on, the landowner, the farmer, the person who's got a few acres so they want to make some money on. The government waved a whole bunch of money in their face and they all went ching, and they stopped looking forward and started looking at their feet and said, I'll take the money now and worry about that later.
Right.
Well, it's later now. And now we're seeing wind turbines. We were driving through one of the prairie provinces on the way back, and I began to notice some of these turbines that are not running have broken blades. We're already seeing it. It's not going to take 20 more years. We're in it now. And this is another one of those stories they won't cover in the mainstream media because the people responsible are still there. And nobody wants to have that news put around their neck.
It's a very serious problem. And disposing, there's a lot of toxic material, not as much toxic material involved in the disposal of wind turbines, although there is some. But the real problem is going to be solar panels, because those solar panels don't last forever. And what are you going to do? How are you going to dispose of them? You're not putting them in a landfill. You know what I'm saying? Is you want to ban plastic from my landfill? I'll take plastic in the landfill any day. Okay. But solar panels in the landfill, that's just an ecological disaster that's waiting to happen. So they're not going to do it. And there's no plan. There's no plan.
Of course not. There never was, because they don't care. They want this agenda so badly, they'll promise everybody, anybody, anything to get it. And they'll worry about the consequences later. Well, now it's later. But just because we're running out of time, and I do want to get to this, there is also another thing that's coming back to haunt us that I thought we were past, and that is this going back to a masking mandate. Certainly, it starts out in the hospitals and so on. Everybody go, oh, you want people to get sick? No, it's not about healthcare. It's about individual autonomy. I want the right to choose the kind of things that I'm going to use as far as my health is concerned, whether it's getting the jab or wearing a mask or social distancing or whatever. All this stuff is coming back. And what I want to know in the last few minutes of the show is how many people are going to fall for it again. There's always going to be some who are so afraid they will put on 14 masks and wear sunglasses in order to avoid the threat that isn't really, whether it's a real threat or not, we should get to choose how we deal with it.
Look, I'm of two minds when it comes to individual, like for instance, a health place. I kind of understand the mentality that goes into that, better safe than sorry type of thing. But what bothers me is when you when people start talking about government imposed mask mandates. You have to wear a mask in an office building. You have to wear a mask on the street. You have to wear blah 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 blah. I'm not convinced that that's going to happen. But I wouldn't. If the government did do it, I would only be mildly surprised. So we have to wait and see. We have to wait and see.
You're right. We have to wait and see. I don't put it past them. I think they'll try it again. What I'm pretty convinced is there are a lot more people this time who are going to say, I'm not playing that game. There are a few of us.
I think I agree completely with that. I think that there are lots of people who are just going to shrug their shoulders and say, I'm just not wearing one. Find me, throw me in jail. I mean, the government just doesn't have the capacity to do that.
If they did that, if they shut the economy down again, which is where this is leading, it would completely destroy what's left of the Canadian economy. It's hard enough to get people to come back to the office now. What are you going to do with the downtown cores when nobody wants to go downtown? We went through that. We've been through this. We don't need to go through it again.
Well,
because it doesn't work.
The commercial vacancy rate here in Ottawa right now, downtown, is at historic levels. It's people are not coming back. And,
they taught people they can do their job from home, in their underwear, sipping a coffee at a computer, rather than suffer the commute, wear a suit and a tie, and go into an office and sit around, doing what they had to do, shuffle paper from one pile to another, and then go home at the end of the day and go through that commute again. Now that people have had a taste of that, they don't want to give it up.
Right. And I've been saying this for a long time, well before COVID, that the revolution that technology is bringing to white collar industry, okay, telecommuting, that kind of stuff, computers, is going to affect office work and that type of work as profoundly as automation affected manufacturing back in the 1980s and 1990s.
Yeah.
It's a very changing industry. It's not COVID and all of the restrictions and that were implemented by the government didn't cause this. It's accelerated what was, I think, was already going to
That's
happen.
fair. I
Yeah.
think that's a very fair point to make. So I hope I'm wrong, but I see a full mask mandate coming within, let's say, the next month or two, and an attempt
Well,
to shut things down by Christmas.
well, if my, we'll see. I that's
I
all I
hope
can
I'm
say.
wrong. Believe me, I hope I'm wrong.
Well, we'll have to if they move in that direction, then we're just going to have to lead lead the opposition to it.
Well, give me that sword and shield. I'll be the first one down the racetrack.
Well, it'll be, Nick. We'll have to organize a new freedom convoy, and you'll be front and center.
And you think the last one was big? You ain't seen nothing yet.
All right. Well, it's been an hour.
It's been fun as always, Joseph.
Yeah. It's
So I guess we should wrap it up and let you get it, do your magic, and we will see you when you're a little bit older. In the meantime, for Joseph and I here at Out of Control, we'll be getting tossed at amor. They are CBS. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace. And may you have a fair wind and a following sea.